They were closing the casket when she leaned in close behind my shoulder and whispered, "You have a week to get out." I still had the funeral program in my lap. My fingers crushed the edge without me even noticing. I didn't turn around. I just sat there frozen, pretending I hadn't heard her while the priest kept talking about closure and peace. My son, Aaron, was gone. Just 33 years old, heart attack out of nowhere, and the only person who ever truly cared about me in this world. Now I'm sitting next to his casket while his wife Madison wears her perfect black dress and fake tears, already planning how to kick me out. She squeezed my shoulder after saying it, gentle-like, as if she was comforting me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The shock was too much. She stood up and walked over to greet someone who just arrived. "She's been so strong," someone said behind me. "Losing a husband at her age, I can't even imagine." I wanted to laugh, but my chest just burned with anger. I stayed quiet through the whole service, through the final prayer, even when people started heading to the reception. When it was time to leave, Madison made a point to help her grandmother to the car, but left me standing alone. I rode with her in Aaron's car, but she didn't say one word to me. The car still smelled like his cologne, and I thought that might break me, but I was too busy trying to figure out what game she was playing. At the house, she led everyone inside. She gave a little speech about Aaron's strength and humor, and how much he loved family. I stood behind the kitchen island and said nothing. She passed out wine, made a toast, hugged people like a widow in a TV show. But I noticed small things. The family photo by the stairs was gone. His army metal box was removed. She was already erasing him. After everyone left, I went to my room. My room, the one I'd lived in for 7 years. The door was wide open. My blankets were folded up. The nightstand lamp was unplugged. I checked the dresser. Half my drawers were empty. My jewelry box was gone. The closet had boxes labeled Mum's stuff. I stood there for a minute like my brain needed time to catch up to what was happening. I walked out past the kitchen. Madison was sitting at the dining table with a glass of wine, phone in hand. She didn't look up. I cleared my throat. "Did you move my things?" I asked. She finally glanced at me and said, "I was just organizing. There's a moving company I can call when you're ready." Then she smiled like it was a kind offer. "Where's my jewelry?" I asked. "Some of it's in the safe. You wouldn't want to lose anything while people were coming in and out," she said. "I never asked you to touch my things," I said. She sipped her wine. "Erin and I talked about this," she said. "It's not personal. We just assumed you'd want to move back to your sister's. I don't have a sister. She knows that." "This is my home," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She just shrugged. It was his home. He would have wanted us to have space to grieve. Then she picked up her phone like I wasn't even there. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. Back in my room, I checked the drawers again, trying to stay calm, trying to think clearly. The box I kept under the bed was gone. I opened the closet and saw a bin marked Old Docs. I pulled it down and dug through it. Receipts, old mail, warranty papers. Then I found my file folder with medical records, bank papers, and my passport. I kept digging, my heart racing now. I couldn't find the deed, the one with my name on it, the one Aaron insisted we keep after I helped with the down payment when he lost his job. That paper was supposed to be in this box. I checked twice. It was gone. Madison's voice floated down the hall. "Hey, do you want leftover salad, or should I toss it?" I didn't answer. My hand was shaking. The deed with my name on it was missing, and I knew right then that this wasn't just grief talking. She was planning this all along. The next morning, the kitchen was silent. The smell of coffee was already gone by the time I walked in. Madison was at the dining table typing on her laptop like it was any normal Tuesday. She looked up and said, "Morning. Just checking a few quotes for movers." I opened the fridge. My labelled containers were gone, replaced by neat stacks of Tupperware that weren't mine. "I didn't ask for movers," I said. She smiled without looking up. Right. But you said you wanted to handle things on your timeline. I figured it might help. She took a sip from her mug and clicked something fast on her computer. I went to the living room. My son's old recliner had been replaced with a fake-looking leather chair. His favorite blanket was folded and stuffed behind the TV stand, like a dog bed. "Where's Aaron's recliner?" I asked. She shrugged. It was old. Didn't fit the room anymore. I stared at her. "It's been a week." She looked annoyed now. "It's been 9 days. I'm not going to sit in a dead man's chair, Ellen." That was the first time she'd said my name since it happened, like it meant nothing to her. I turned and walked outside just to breathe. I sat on the porch steps, pulled out my phone, and called a lawyer Aaron once recommended when we were updating our wills. The secretary said he could see me that afternoon. I didn't tell Madison where I was going. I just left. The lawyer, Mr. Holt, remembered Aaron immediately. "Solid guy," he said. "I'm so sorry." I told him what was happening, how Madison claimed I had to leave, how my name had been on the deed, how the document was now missing. He asked how long I'd lived there. 7 years, I said. Since they bought it, he asked if I had any written record of paying into the down payment. "I used a cashier's check," I said. "I still have the receipt." His eyes lit up. "Then we may have something." Madison was on the phone when I got back from the lawyer, pacing near the hallway. "No, she doesn't know anything," she said into the phone, lowering her voice when she saw me. "It's handled." I walked past her and went straight to the attic. Aaron had kept boxes up there from before they were married. Old school files, taxes, moving documents. My heart was pounding as I climbed up and started pulling open boxes. Dust everywhere. I found his university box, his military records box, then one labelled Home Purchase. My breath caught. I yanked it out, sat on the attic floor, and started flipping through papers. Closing statements, home insurance, bank loan approvals. And then there it was, a manila envelope marked Final Deed. I opened it and stared. My name, my signature, his signature, all dated, notarized, and filed. I sat there for a second, letting it sink in. Madison was bluffing. She either didn't know about the deed, or she knew and hoped I didn't. I tucked the folder into my coat and climbed down the ladder. She was standing at the bottom, watching me. "Looking for something?" she asked, eyebrows raised. I looked her straight in the eye. "Just some old paperwork, nothing important." She smiled tightly. "That's good. I wouldn't want you to get stressed." Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen, like we hadn't just had a silent showdown. That night, I made copies of the deed and scanned it into my email. I created a folder labeled For Lawyer Only. I wasn't stupid. She thought she was ahead, but now I had leverage. I just needed to move carefully. Around 9 p.m., she came in with 2 glasses of wine and said, "I figured we should talk. Clear the air." I took the glass, but didn't drink. "Okay." She sat on the couch across from me. "I know things have been tense, but Aaron always said this house was for us, for our future family." I said nothing. She looked down at her glass. "I don't want it to get ugly. I just want to move forward." I stared at her hand, left ring finger, still wearing his wedding band. She looked up. "You understand, right? Have you spoken to a lawyer?" I asked. Her face twitched. "No, I didn't think it was necessary." I smiled. "Maybe it is." Her eyes narrowed for a second. She took a sip of wine. "Are you threatening me, Ellen?" I smiled back. "No, just thinking out loud." She stood up slowly. "I hope we can do this the easy way." I nodded. "So do I." She walked down the hall, glass still in hand. I waited until she was out of sight, then pulled out my phone and checked the scanned deed one more time. My name was clear as day. She thought she had me boxed in, but she didn't know what I'd just found upstairs. The next morning, I printed 2 copies of the deed, and tucked them into a sealed envelope marked with my lawyer's name. I dropped it off at his office without calling ahead, told his assistant it was time-sensitive, then walked out before she could ask questions. Back at the house, Madison was in the garage, clearing shelves like she'd already moved on from grief. She looked up as I pulled in. "Hey," she said casually. "Just getting rid of junk. Hope that's okay." I nodded and walked inside, pretending not to notice that Aaron's fishing gear was gone. I went to my room, opened the top drawer of my nightstand, and found it locked. That drawer had never had a lock before. I got a flathead screwdriver and pried it open. Inside, my prescription bottle was gone. So was my small cash envelope. She was sending a message. She wanted me to know I had no privacy left. I sat on the bed and breathed through my teeth until the burning in my chest passed. Then I did something I hadn't done since Aaron died. I opened his filing cabinet in the office. Third drawer down, I found a folder labeled Refinance Options. Inside were newer mortgage statements with both our names, dated less than a year ago. That mattered. Madison hadn't been added, not even after the refinance. I snapped a photo and backed it up to my cloud storage. I heard Madison's voice in the hallway, talking to someone on speakerphone. "Yeah, she's still here. I know it's awkward, but she doesn't have any real claim." A pause then. "No, her name's not on the current utilities or tax bills. It'll be fine." I stepped into the hallway and made just enough noise for her to know I'd heard. She turned fast, eyes wide. "Everything okay?" she asked. "You really should be careful what you say in this house," I said. "The walls are thin." Then I went back to the kitchen and started making coffee like nothing had happened. The rest of the day, Madison stayed out of my way. Around 6 p.m., I walked past the living room and saw she'd replaced the family portrait with a landscape print, blue mountains and empty snow, no people. I stared at it longer than I meant to. That night, she ordered Chinese food and left mine in the bag on the counter. No note, no courtesy. I took the food, closed my door, and locked it from the inside with the door wedge I'd kept since last week. I wasn't taking chances. At 2 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my room, slow, deliberate. I got up, pressed my ear to the door. No knock, just a pause, then retreating steps. In the morning, my alarm clock was flashing. Power had gone out for exactly 1 minute. I checked the circuit breaker. All switches were fine. I didn't say a word to Madison at breakfast. She offered me coffee like nothing had happened. I declined. Then I went back to the lawyer. This time I sat down across from Mr. Holt and handed him the photos, refinance documents, and deed copies. He reviewed them one by one, nodding. "She has no legal standing," he said. "Her name never appears, and you've contributed both financially and lived there for over 7 years. If she tries to evict you, she'll lose." I asked if I could file something preemptively. He nodded. "We'll draft a notice of shared ownership and prepare a legal response to any false claims. If she serves you anything, we respond immediately." I asked about my risk. "Only if you lose your documents," he said. "Keep them safe and stay calm." I drove home with a new kind of silence in my chest. Not grief, not fear, but focus. When I walked in, Madison was folding laundry on the couch. She looked up and said, "Did you go somewhere?" "Just needed fresh air," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "You seem confident all of a sudden." I smiled and said, "I just remembered something important." She stared for a second, then said, "Well, I hope it doesn't make things harder." I opened the fridge and saw my labeled food was back. Same handwriting as before. That night, I heard her in the guest room talking on the phone again. "Yeah, she's acting weird. I might need to move up the timeline." Another pause. "If she finds that file, we're screwed." She didn't know I already had it. She didn't know the file was already with a lawyer, but now I knew for certain she was hiding something bigger than just a property dispute, and I was about to find out what. 3 days later, Madison hosted what she called A grief gathering for Aaron's friends and co-workers, something she announced casually over coffee as if it were a birthday brunch. Just a little closure, she said, pouring almond milk into her mug while ignoring the second one I had placed beside it. She didn't ask me to help prep for it, which was fine. She barely acknowledged me at all that week, except to ask me to keep the guest bathroom clean and to not mention any personal matters if I spoke with anyone. I didn't argue, said nothing, but I watched. I watched as she brought out Aaron's old bar cart and stocked it like she was throwing a cocktail party, watched her line the counter with mini quiches and imported crackers, like we hadn't just buried him. The first guest arrived just after 6 p.m., Aaron's friend Kyle from work. He gave me a long hug and whispered, "He talked about you all the time. Said you were the one person he could always count on." I nodded, holding back tears. Then came others, neighbors, co-workers, a few of Madison's Pilates friends. Some I recognized, others I didn't. Madison floated through the room like a gracious host, glass in hand, giving little speeches about Aaron's generosity and light. I stood near the back wall, watching her smile at strangers while ignoring the fact she'd gutted his room and thrown out his books. At one point, someone asked me how I was holding up. I said, "As well as I can be, considering I still live here." The woman looked confused. I added, "Aaron and I co-owned the house. Madison's handling things now, but I still live here." Her eyebrows lifted. "Oh, I thought she said it was hers." I smiled politely. Easy mistake. An hour later, I caught Madison watching me from across the room. Her face was still smiling, but her eyes had changed, tight and calculating. She came over when things quieted and said, "Can I speak to you for a moment?" I followed Madison into the hallway. She shut the door behind us. "Are you trying to start something?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. I answered a question honestly, I said. She stepped closer. "Don't play cute, Ellen. These people don't need to hear about paperwork." I folded my arms, then stopped lying about it. She stared at me hard, then composed herself. "Look, this is delicate. These are people who cared about Aaron. They're here to support me." "Then maybe don't throw a wine mixer in the house you're trying to erase him from," I said. Her face flushed. "If you don't want to be here, you're free to leave." I smiled. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere." She leaned in close, whispering just like she did at the funeral. "You think you're clever, Ellen, but you don't know how this works. I'll make sure you regret staying." Then she walked out with that same polite expression and greeted the next guest, like we hadn't just hissed threats at each other in the hallway. The rest of the evening, I stayed quiet. I watched. I listened. I noticed one guest, a man in his 40s with a shaved head and designer coat, kept looking at me like he was trying to place me. He spoke briefly with Madison near the hallway, then left early. Something about the way he moved, cautious and low-voiced, stuck with me. After everyone left, Madison cleaned up silently. I offered no help. She didn't ask. At midnight, I walked past the guest room and saw a manila folder in her open tote bag. It wasn't there earlier. I stepped back into my room, grabbed my phone, and took a silent photo through the crack in her door. The folder said, "Doc copies backup plan." That night, I waited until I heard her shower running. Then I stepped into the hallway and opened the tote. Inside were multiple folders. One marked House Timeline, another labeled E-Signatures 2023. I didn't take anything. I just photographed them quickly. One file had a screenshot of a will with a digital signature I didn't recognize. The bottom corner said, "Filed March 4th. Aaron died February 2nd. He hadn't signed anything in March." I stood there, breath frozen, as the water shut off. I moved fast, closed her bag, stepped back into my room, and waited in silence as she passed the hallway, humming, wrapped in a robe. My hands were still shaking, but now I had more than just a deed. I had proof she was trying to forge documents. Something bigger was happening here. And tomorrow I was going to dig even deeper into whatever e-signatures 2023 was supposed to cover. I woke up the next morning to the sound of sniffling in the kitchen. Not loud sobs, just a delicate pattern of quiet crying meant to be overheard. When I walked in, Madison was standing by the sink in her robe, holding a crumpled tissue and staring out the window like she was in a soap opera. As soon as she noticed me, she turned around and wiped under her eyes, forcing a smile like she was being brave, and said, "I'm sorry. Sometimes it just hits me all over again." And then she placed a hand on her belly, not dramatically, but just enough that I noticed. I froze because that was new. She looked up and said softly, "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. I'm pregnant, Ellen." For a full 5 seconds, I couldn't speak, couldn't move, because it didn't make any sense, not after everything I'd seen, and not with the timing. "How far along?" I asked. She replied quickly, 8 weeks, maybe 9. That snapped everything into place because Aaron had been dead for 10 weeks. I just stared at her, trying not to show the alarm ripping through my chest while she walked over and placed a sonogram photo on the table like a trump card. I picked it up, turning it slowly, noticing the corner, her name, the clinic, and the date printed in clean black type, not 10 weeks ago, but 4. That was the moment I realized the pregnancy had nothing to do with Aaron at all. It was just about control. "I used a donor," she said. "Aaron and I had talked about it just in case. He wanted me to have a piece of him. I knew in that second it was a lie. Aaron would have told me something that major." I looked at her and said nothing, just handed the photo back without reacting. She added, "I hope you understand now why it's so important for me to have stability for the baby's sake." I realized then she was setting up a sympathy narrative, something she could use in court if it came to that. The grieving widow expecting a child being forced to share a home with an unstable mother-in-law. I nodded slowly and told her, "That changes things." Her whole face softened like she believed I was folding, like her little performance had worked. But the second she left the room, I grabbed my phone, pulled up the photo I'd taken of the document in her bag, and matched the sonogram date with the file date. 4 days apart, both from the same week, both planted like evidence. I forwarded them to Mr. Holt with a short message. "We need to talk." Within an hour, he called me back and said, "This actually helps us if she's claiming dependency or emotional hardship. We can force her to show medical records and timeline consistency." "What if she faked the entire thing?" I asked. "Then it's fraud," he said. "And if you keep documenting this calmly, we'll win before it ever reaches trial." "She's trying to bait me into reacting," I said. "Then don't," he replied. And I didn't. I kept quiet. I cleaned the bathroom. I folded laundry. I smiled when she made little comments like, "This baby's going to need so much space," or "It's going to be hard raising a child in a hostile environment." Each time she looked at me like she was gauging how close I was to snapping, and I just nodded and kept my mouth shut until that Friday when I got an envelope slid under my door in a manila folder marked "Urgent 48 hours notice." Inside the envelope was a typed document, clearly not court-filed, stating that I had 48 hours to vacate the property due to emotional instability and personal threats. I sat there staring at it, heart pounding, not from fear, but from how sloppily she just handed me a lie I could crush with one email. As I reread it, I noticed one final line at the bottom that made my skin crawl. "Failure to vacate will result in law enforcement involvement and potential elder neglect claims." That was it. That was the card she'd decided to play. She was going to paint me as a dangerous old woman in court, unstable and violent, even though I'd done nothing but make toast and fold towels. She was forcing a move, triggering a panic, hoping I'd run before I fought back. I knew what I had to do next. I had to stop waiting for her to overplay her hand, because she just did. I didn't say a word after reading that fake eviction notice. I just folded it slowly, slid it into a new folder with the other documents Madison had conveniently gifted me over the last 2 weeks, and drove straight to Mr. Holt's office. No appointment, no delay, because this was no longer about defending my right to live in the house. This was about dismantling the fantasy world she was trying to build. When I sat down across from him and handed over the newest file, his eyes scanned the last line, and he actually chuckled, not out of amusement, but disbelief. She's threatening you with elder neglect charges while you're the one being emotionally harassed, documented, and financially gaslighted, he said. I told him everything about the fake pregnancy timeline, the IVF clinic label, the donor date, the staged photos, the phone calls I overheard at night, and the conversations I baited her into without ever raising my voice. We're beyond civil conflict now, he said. This is pre-fraud litigation territory, and if she's altered financial documents or used your identity in any capacity, we could be looking at criminal charges. What's the fastest way to prove it? I asked. We request a discovery subpoena on her digital records, emails, text logs, medical submissions, banking, he replied. Will a judge even grant that? I asked. If we show the forged eviction, pregnancy inconsistency, and misrepresentation of the deed ownership all documented, we don't just have a case, we have leverage, he said. I sat there breathing in the fact that for the first time since Erin died, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was about to flip the script on the person who thought she could erase me. On my way home, I stopped at a print shop and ordered 3 bound copies of everything. The deed with my name, the refinance record, the ultrasound photo with the false date, the text of the eviction threat, the names of every person who saw her try to rewrite the house's history during the grief gathering. I labelled the binder spine, Case File Madison, then put 1 copy in my safe deposit box, 1 at my lawyer's office, and 1 under the floorboard of my closet, where she wouldn't find it even if she tore the place apart. When I came home that night, Madison was in the kitchen on a video call, headset in, laughing about some new real estate opportunity, and said to the person on the screen, "Yeah, I'll have access to the place within 2 weeks tops." I stood behind the wall, frozen in place, realizing that she wasn't just trying to win the house out of grief or insecurity. She was planning to sell it, which meant she wasn't even staying here long term. She just wanted the property rights for her own gain. I stepped into the room and made sure she saw me, didn't say anything, just walked to the fridge, pulled out a water bottle, and stared at her until she ended the call. She turned slowly and said, "Do you need something?" "Just a heads up," I said. "If another envelope comes to my door, make sure it's court-stamped. Anything less goes straight to my attorney." She blinked fast like I'd slapped her, then said, "Are you threatening me now?" "You started the paperwork war, Madison," I replied. "I'm just keeping mine legal." I walked out before she could reply. That night, I did one last thing. I opened Aaron's old email account, which he'd once shared access to when I helped him job hunt years ago. The password, his favorite song lyric, plus his service number, still worked. What I found wasn't much, mostly job applications and bills. But then I found a flagged folder marked Estate. Inside were PDFs, including one labeled Draft Will February 2023. When I opened it, I stopped breathing because the signature at the bottom didn't match his handwriting. The notary seal was cropped and reused. And worst of all, the document listed Madison as sole heir and property owner with no mention of me, even though the date was 1 week before his death. I printed it without touching a thing, heart pounding, realizing this was it. The thing she was trying to hide. The file she must have buried in the folder I'd seen in her tote. And this version had metadata from her computer name. Not Aaron's, not a legal firm, just Madison K. Drafts. I sent the file straight to Mr. Holt and wrote, "She forged his will," and I didn't even flinch as I pressed send. Part 6. The next morning, Holt called me before I even finished my toast, his voice calm but firm as he said, "We're filing today." That was the moment everything shifted from quiet defense to active offense, because now we had digital proof of forgery, proof of intent to defraud, proof of manipulated legal documents with a traceable computer signature. He walked me through our next moves, step by step, filing a motion to freeze any transfer of the property title, requesting a court review of the will, submitting a fraud alert through the probate court, and placing a protective notice on the house to stop any unauthorized sale or refinance attempt. "You don't have to serve her, the court will," he added. I nodded even though he couldn't see me, because finally someone else was going to speak for me, and I wouldn't have to keep pretending I was powerless in the house I helped pay for. By noon that day, Madison must have felt something shift, because she got weirdly friendly, offering to make lunch, asking if I wanted to help her shop for baby things. When I said no, she tilted her head and asked, "Are we good?" I just smiled and said, "We'll see." That afternoon while she was out, I got a call from a process server who said, "We'll be delivering a set of papers later today. Do not engage." "Trust me, I won't," I replied. I sat on the couch with the blinds open and waited. Around 5 p.m., she pulled into the driveway in her new SUV, 2 shopping bags in hand. The second she stepped onto the porch, a man in a grey jacket appeared from his car, walked up the steps, and said her full name with a clean, practiced tone. She paused, confused, and said, "Yes?" He handed her a thick envelope and said, "You've been served. Probate fraud and property injunction." She blinked, lips parting, and asked, "What the hell is this?" "You'll need to read it," he said, then walked away without another word. I watched her from the living room window, holding the envelope like it had weight, staring at the seal, and then her eyes flicked toward the house, toward me. I didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there until she came inside with quick steps and slammed the envelope on the dining table. She opened it, scanned the first page, then the second, and I heard her whisper, "No, no, no." Then louder, "She's lying." "This is all lies." She turned to me and shouted, "What did you tell them?" I stood up and said, "I didn't tell them anything. The documents did." She threw the envelope onto the floor and stormed into the kitchen, muttering, "I'll fix this. This isn't happening." I didn't say a word because she wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to the world that had finally said no to her. That night, she didn't eat, didn't talk, didn't even come out of her room. The next morning, I found her pacing the front yard on the phone with someone hissing, "Just get me a lawyer who knows how to bury this." And then, "I don't care what it costs. She's just an old woman." I stood on the porch with my arms crossed, letting her know I heard every word. 2 days later, the court date was set, a preliminary hearing to establish will validity and deed ownership. When we showed up, Madison walked in wearing a cream blazer and holding her fake ultrasound photo like a prop. Her attorney started with a soft-voiced performance about widowhood, grief, and maternal protection, but Holt shut it down with cold evidence. Side-by-side comparisons of Aaron's real signature and the one she'd submitted, metadata trails from her laptop proving she'd opened and edited the document herself, plus the refinancing records that excluded her entirely. Then came the kicker, the deed in my name and Aaron's, legally recorded, unmodified, and untouched by Madison in any legal form. When Holt said, "Your Honor, my client has been a co-owner of this property since day one," the judge leaned forward, reviewed the file and said, "Counselor, this is extremely clear." I watched Madison's entire posture collapse, shoulders sinking, mouth twitching like she wanted to scream but couldn't. The judge said, "Temporary ownership freeze lifted. Mrs. Ellen retains legal co-ownership. All eviction claims are void. As for the will, subject to fraud investigation." Madison's lawyer whispered something fast to her, and she looked at him like he'd betrayed her. I stood there steady, silent, strong, because this wasn't a victory lap. This was just the truth finally spoken out loud. As we left the courtroom, Holt turned to me and said, "Now we wait to see if she pushes back or packs her bags." The house was too quiet the next morning, not peaceful but charged, like the kind of silence before a storm. When I walked into the kitchen, Madison was already there, dressed in all black, like she was going to another funeral. She sat at the table with her untouched coffee and a legal pad filled with names and phone numbers. She didn't look up when I entered, just said, "You think you've won?" I poured my own coffee without answering, letting her fill the silence with her own unraveling. "You think just because you got a judge to believe your little story that it's over," she continued. I finally turned and said, "It wasn't a story, Madison. It was the law." That snapped something in her because she stood up so fast, the chair screeched against the tile. "You don't get to steal everything from me," she said. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You tried to erase me from a house I helped build, in a life I was always part of, and you used a fake will and a fake pregnancy to do it." She froze, mouth open, and then tried to shift gears, saying I was grieving, but it didn't land. Not anymore. The act was dead, and we both knew it. "Pack your things," I said. "I'm giving you the same respect you never gave me. I'm not calling the sheriff yet." She opened her mouth like she was going to yell, then shut it again, grabbed her phone, and stormed out of the house. I sat down and sipped my coffee, finally tasting it without fear in my throat. For the next few hours the house stayed quiet, not just on the surface, but inside too, like the first breath after months underwater. I went into Aaron's old room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the empty bookshelf, the walls he painted himself. "We're okay now, baby. I promise," I said quietly. Then I opened his top drawer, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral, and found something I didn't expect. A folded sheet of paper, handwritten, unsigned, with his handwriting, dated 3 weeks before his death. It started with, "If anything happens to me, I need you to know I'm sorry." I felt my chest lock up as I kept reading line after line of guilt, frustration, regret about how he'd let Madison isolate him from people, how he knew she was manipulative, but he was trying to fix it, how he felt like he couldn't tell me things anymore because she made him feel like he was choosing sides. At the bottom it read, "Don't let her take everything. This house was always ours, not hers. Do what you have to do, Mom." My hands started shaking, not from grief, but from clarity, because even in death, he had tried to give me the final word. I took the letter, scanned it into my phone, and locked it in my drawer next to the deed. By sunset, Madison returned with a face full of fire and said, "You'll regret this. I'll go to the press. I'll tell them you bullied a grieving widow. Then I'll show them the ultrasound dates, the will metadata, and the letter Aaron left me," I replied. Her face went pale like she'd seen a ghost because she didn't know about that last one. "You're bluffing," she whispered. "Try me," I said. She turned around and walked away, slamming her door so hard a frame fell off the hallway wall. I didn't flinch. I just picked up the frame, reset it, and made dinner like it was any other night. While the pasta boiled, I texted Holt and said, "Found a personal letter strengthening motive. I'll forward." He replied within seconds, "Send. It's bulletproof." That night, for the first time in months, I slept with the window open, no door wedge, no backup key under the pillow, just silence and cool air. In the morning, I heard boxes being packed. By Sunday morning, the hall outside Madison's bedroom was lined with cardboard boxes, some labeled, some not, some with tape barely holding the flaps closed, like she'd packed them in a hurry. I didn't ask if she was really leaving because I already knew she was out of legal cards to play, and whatever bluff she was clinging to had crumbled under the weight of court documents and her own arrogance. When she came into the kitchen, she didn't speak at first, just opened a drawer like she was looking for something that had never been there to begin with. Then finally turned to me and said, "I'll be out by Friday." I nodded, no smile, no sarcasm, just a calm nod like it was a logistics meeting and not the end of a months-long war. "You can have your house back," she added. "It was never yours to give," I said. That hit her harder than yelling ever would have because she froze for a second. then looked away like she wanted to spit something back, but couldn't find a word that wouldn't snap in her mouth. I walked past her and put the kettle on the stove, not to be dramatic, but because I genuinely wanted tea. I'd learned by now that the most powerful move I had left was not reacting, just continuing to live like she was already gone. By Thursday, her car was loaded with the last of her things. Her face was pale, makeup smeared under her eyes, like she'd finally allowed herself to realize this wasn't just a legal loss. It was personal, it was public, and it was permanent. She came to the door that morning, holding her last bag, and said, "You don't have to do this." "Neither did you," I replied. She stepped back like she wasn't expecting that answer, like she wanted me to be dramatic or scream or cry or give her one more reason to tell the world I was the villain. But I just stood there calm and still, watching her process the truth in real time, that she'd played every card, burned every lie, and ended up exactly where she started, standing on a porch she never owned, with a future she couldn't sell. I opened the door and said, "You have until midnight." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. I looked her in the eye and said, "Anywhere that isn't here." Then I closed the door, not to be cruel, but to be finished. I watched from the window as she stood on the porch for a full minute, just frozen, before finally walking to her car, slamming the trunk, and driving off without looking back. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. When the sun went down, I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and for the first time in months, let myself sit in the quiet without listening for her footsteps or watching my back. The house was mine again, clean and unclaimed. I pulled out a photo of Aaron from my drawer, the one she had removed from the living room, and placed it back on the shelf where it belonged. I ran my fingers over his smiling face and whispered, "We did it, baby. We're home." Then I took a deep breath and felt something I hadn't felt since before the funeral. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the quiet knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, in the home we had built together, with all the time in the world to heal.